I know that you guys were promised entertaining and engaging speakers. I'm going to apologize right now. I am not that person. No, that's actually a lie. So what I am here today to talk to you guys about is just kind of an overview of threat hunting. Kind of what it is, how to do it, and really in its most basic form. I'm not going to, there's going to be a little bit of terminology here. But I guess actually the first thing I should ask, when I say the term indicator of compromise, does anybody here have no idea what that is? IOC, indicator of compromise? One. Okay, so everybody else has heard about it in some way, shape, or form? Okay, all right. So the reason I ask is just so that way I know there's a couple of slides in here that if there was like, there was a lot of people in here that were laymen, so to speak, that I was going to spend a little bit more time on. So, quick introduction. My name is Ander Hoagland. I'm what's called a technical advisor at Trend Micro. So my job is to work with like the big named accounts and kind of work as a member of that company's staff. But as it pertains to the Trend Micro products. The reason I'm up here talking to you guys is not because of that, but because of what I did prior. So prior to joining Trend, which I've been there for about 3 years, I did about 8-9 years of threat and incident management. I have my undergraduate degree in forensic science. I have my master's degree in digital forensics. I was an NCASE certified digital forensic investigator and a sworn expert witness as well. So when I came on board to the last company I worked at, I was just doing dead box forensics. And then after, just before I was leaving, we were formalizing and deploying a fully blown threat intelligence and threat hunting program. So what I'm going to speak to you guys about is something that I've done myself and I've kind of talked about in the past. So if you have any questions, absolutely feel free to raise a hand, ask, interrupt. I can talk so much. I can fill up 2 hours. I'm going to try and keep it to about 30 to 45. But I welcome questions. So if you catch me when I'm breathing and I'm not talking, ask, okay? So just very, very simple. We're just going to kind of go over threat hunting, kind of what it is. What it is that you're actually looking for, because I could get into a lot of technical details of it, but there's one word that you're going to hear me use a lot, and it's, I'll get to it in there, but I guess it's kind of an all-encompassing term for what it is that you're going to be looking for, where you're going to be looking for it, what are your sources, and what kind of tools can you use to be able to do that. And then what I'm going to do is actually go how to look for it. So I'm going to kind of start you guys through a scenario where you get asked a question, because that's how these things almost always start, is a question. Hey, have you heard about this? What about that? And then how you go from the question to a hypothesis to actually being able to go out and do the research and then gather the data to be able to answer or confirm or deny that hypothesis. And then I have another, when I did this before, it was more interactive. I actually had a much smaller group, but we walked through the exercise. So what we are going to do is actually go through and look at an actual like APT group. I kid you not, it's called Ferocious Kitten. And we're going to go through it, and in this case, what I'm going to do is walk you through kind of that research and what types of things that I'm going to be looking for in there. Like what would be those, I use that term, indicator of compromise. What types of things would I be looking for if I was asked, okay, were we attacked by this particular group? Something along those lines. So threat hunting and real hunting share a lot of similarities with the exception of you're not actually killing anything. But in order to be able to go out and perform a threat hunt, you have to know what it is that you're looking for, right? Nobody just wanders off into the woods and says, I'm going to shoot whatever it is that comes across my way. Well, I mean, you might, but let's be honest, it's not usually something that happens, okay? So there is a level of knowledge that is required, and I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people get kind of unnerved about when you talk about threat hunting, is that kind of level of knowledge. And I'm here to tell you right now, that bar is not nearly as high as you guys think it is, especially with a lot of the work that MITRE has been doing. So, but if you think about it, you have to know your environment. You have to know the animal. You have to know its behaviors. You have to know the kinds of tracks that it's going to leave behind in order to be able to find it. You're not going to go hunting for an antelope. You're not going to go hunting for an antelope in a bog. You're going to go find the area where it exists. You're going to go find a high arid plain. You're going to go find, kind of a desert. I forget the proper term for it, right? So you have to know what it is that you're looking for. And when you find those pieces of evidence that this particular animal may have been here, you have to be able to interpret those, right? It was running, it was going a particular direction, it was moving, it was sitting, it bedded down for the night. And so part of it is just being able to understand what it is that you're actually going after. And then, because you got to be able to figure out what it looks like, how it lives, and the other thing is kind of how it behaves. And you're going to hear me talk about behavior a lot in this, because what you are doing when you're threat hunting is you're going out and you're looking for evidence that an action doesn't necessarily have to be malicious, but that an action has occurred on a system, somewhere, somehow, that wasn't picked up by a security tool. So, and there's lots of ways to do that, but where you look and what exactly you look for all depends upon the behaviors, specifically the behaviors of your adversaries. So if I want to take and break this down, where I really need to just kind of get and make sure that everybody's familiar is teach you guys what types of things you're going to be looking for, tracks, signs of predation, right? If we're going to go back and continue the analogy of how hunting is very close to looking for animals, and where to look. What types of data sources are you going to be using, and kind of other additional tools that you can use to go out and kind of grab that information. And this is where I said, earlier, that bar seems to be, a lot of people think that bar is particularly high. It really isn't. Attack.mitre.org, the MITRE attack framework, has done so much to make hunting and detecting advanced adversaries so much easier that I can't even, when I started doing this, the most I had was like a Google search and a couple of white papers and a research paper. And that was really kind of at the infancy. MITRE has gone through and basically codified and categorized the entire threat hunting and attack, I guess, universe, world, whatever you might want to call it. And they have made it so easy for you to be able to go into, look up the different types of attack techniques, look up the different adversary groups and everything like that. So if I'm going to point you towards one location, and we're going to use this at least one or two other times today, that attack.mitre.org. So the signs, I used the term earlier, indicator of compromise, IOC. It is, in its most basic form, any evidence of a malicious action. Now, what most people are used to seeing is the ones that we have up there, the IP addresses, URLs, hashes. Those are great, don't get me wrong, they are incredibly useful, but they are not the only ones. And so you get into other things, which, folder structure can actually be an indicator of compromise. So what you will find is when attackers come in and they want to either stage data or stage their tools, in some cases when they drop those things in, they'll have a set folder structure with a name. Now, a lot of times they like to use the pseudo-random number generators and stuff like that, so they'll have some level of randomization in there. But I've seen more than my fair share of cases where it's literally temp, some random alphanumeric string, and then it's /bin. So then all I have to do to go locate the tools across all the rest of the Windows environment is just search for that. And that's a fairly simple regex expression, right? I mean, you just put a star in the middle of random and let it go do its thing. And I've seen the same thing, the actual naming conventions. Now, while they're not necessarily the greatest ones to go look for because they're so easy to change, a lot of times if stuff's being done, especially programmatically, you're going to find that there's going to be commonalities in the naming structures and stuff like that. So there's been more than my fair share of cases where it'll literally look something like that for the name of the executable. It'll lead in with some pseudo-random thing, and then it'll have 4 or 5 set, like it'll actually say something, and it'll be .exe. So that's not exactly particularly difficult to search for if you have the right logs and the right records. Anybody here know what a mutex object is? 1, 2, maybe 3? Okay, so a mutex object is a memory, it's a, think of it as like a gatekeeper. It's an object in RAM that prevents different threads from accessing the same resource at the same time. So if one process is using a piece of memory and then another process wants to come in and do it, that mutex object is going to prevent it from doing that. Now when one process releases, then the other process can come in. The reason why I bring these up is malware writers don't want to infect the same machine twice. So what they a lot of times will do as part of the installation or that initial run process is they'll actually put a check for mutex objects in the startup or when the system first loads. So when the program is running, that object is there. And all they then have to do when the program loads is make a check in the, I can't remember where they're stored, but they check for that mutex object. If it's there, it kills the execution and it doesn't do anything else. So something like a mutex object becomes very, very helpful when you're looking for signs that maybe malware might have been or is running across your environment.
Why not infect twice? Just as a waste of time, I guess.
Waste of time. Okay. Yeah, because you run it, you've already got your malware on there, you've already got it running. Now imagine you try and you run it again. And you have to remember how malware most of the time is going to execute now. It's going to run, and then it's going to try and ping out and register itself with the command and control server. So now all of a sudden you've got 2 computers pinging out, pretending, so you've doubled it, but you haven't actually doubled your access to additional computing resources and targets kind of a thing. The registry. Keys, registry keys, persistence mechanisms. I mean, has anybody here know how startup programs are set? There's about 50 different ways that you can set a program to run at startup. And it's a very, very common persistence mechanism is to add malware as a service, to add it as a startup item, and they can do it through any number of different methodologies. So you can go through and search like registry keys. Another thing to look at is so you can look for like where I gave you the example of the folder structure, something very specific where you know where it's going to be. But you can also do threat hunting using different characteristics. So in registry keys, the size. Anybody know why the size might be something that you want to look at? Anybody ever hear you get the no, so what they will try and do is instead of actually writing the file like the malware to a disk, to an actual like executable file, what they will do is just go and put it inside of a registry entry. And then load it to a temporary file or load it to an in-RAM and then load it from there. So it's considered fileless, but the actual binary code itself is written into the registry key. So your average registry key is very, very small. It's a 1 or a 0 or maybe 36 characters at most. And then all of a sudden you have a registry key that's 20 megs. Right? So it doesn't have to be just something like a hash value or an IP address. It can be anything from a folder to something as far as the execution goes. But the other thing are actions, and behaviors. Behaviors are IOCs too, because and this is where you're going to see, this is where logging. A lot of the other ones that I talked about are types of pieces of evidence that you're going to find on a disk, like actually in the operating system. You're going to have to be able to look at the endpoint. These types of actions, these behaviors, most of these are going to show up in logs. So disabling services, one of the things that they love to do is when they get in there, they want to turn off your AV. Clearing logs. I'll give you a great story about this one. We showed up to an incident, and what we found, and what the customer explained to us is that they'd gotten hit, and one of the pieces of evidence that they found from the attacker was a script that they were pushing out to the systems and then running it, and it was like a shotgun to try and turn off all of the AV. But one of the things that was in there at the very last line was the command to clear the logs. Does anybody know what the first entry in a cleared log file is? The log has been cleared. So when we came up there and we started working with them, they said, well, we have 3 systems that we know about. We took one look at that file and we go, you guys have a syslog server, right? They're like, yep. I go, give me all of your, and I can't remember the specific event. I said, go search through your logs for this event number and set your window for the last 48 hours. And we were able to go from 3 systems to 15 systems, because that's where we said, okay, 15 systems have all had their logs cleared. Let's go check. And then we went in there and we were able to find on all of those systems, we were able to find where the attacker had pushed that out and tried to disable. So just because it's not something that you can't see on a disk doesn't necessarily mean that those are IOCs too. You're just looking for the evidence of them, and most of the time you're going to find them in something like a log, in a log file. So any questions before I move on? The next one? All right.
I was curious, what's the difference between the mutex and just keeping your cookie?
So a mutex is specific for RAMs and processes. RAM, so when the program runs, right, it's got a set allocation for RAM, and inside of there they might have specific areas that you want to read and write to. The mutex prevents the multi-threaded processes from writing to the same area or reading from the same area at the same time. So it basically prevents the basically collisions for resource utilization.
Because concurrency is happening. You do need a mutex.
Yeah. Yeah, because what will happen is that one thread will be using that area, and then another thread will try and do it. Now imagine this thread is reading and writing all of the information out of this space, but then all of a sudden another thread is actively writing over it while this thing is working. And you just don't want to do that. So the mutex objects prevent those threads from using those spaces at the same time.
Is there a way, in your knowledge, to measure, audit the usage of those mutexes?
I haven't run across anything. Now, just like everything else that we kind of talk about here, disabling services, creating accounts, using the registry, all of that stuff, they have valid business purposes. So you can actually go through and list out all of the mutexes in like a Windows system. It's I can't remember specifically how to do it, but you can actually like list them all the way out. And depending upon what you're running, there could be several hundred of them. But the reason that they're important, and the reason I brought them up here is that they're very often used by malware writers to signal, hey, this system has already been infected. There's no need to touch it again. So has anybody here heard or seen the Pyramid of Pain? and it's not the good kind. So the pyramid of pain is actually a representation of how difficult it is for it's the type of data you're using versus how difficult it is for an attacker to re-engage. So if you are using, and at the very beginning, domain names, IP addresses, and hash values, if you change a bit, a 1 to a 0, and then recompile that binary, the hash value is completely changed. It doesn't slow them down, but for maybe 2 seconds. IP addresses and domain names, those things get changed out very regularly, right? So when you get those indicators of compromise, yeah, they're great. You should go absolutely use them if you can. But when you run them, and just because you don't get a hit back, that doesn't really give you a lot of confidence that, no, we haven't been attacked or we haven't been subjected to this vulnerability or whatever it might happen to be. The farther you get up the pyramid, the more difficult it is for your adversary to re-engage. And so when you are looking for indicators of compromise, one of the things that everybody wants when you're doing threat hunting, they talk about confidence. How can you make a search or go search for those IOCs where you're really confident that when you go back to answer that question, yes or no, we don't have a problem with this, or we do. The higher you're up on the pyramid, the more confidence you can have in the results that you're getting. So like I said, if you just go search for hash values, IP addresses, and domain names, those get changed around all the time. So that might not necessarily, you might have actually been attacked, but they were using a different domain. They were using different infrastructure, right? They changed the hashes on their executables, on their new malware, just for you guys, so you don't have hash values, right? They're all going to be completely different. But as you start working your way up, network and host artifacts, and the tools. So do they like to use something like Cobalt Strike? Do they use standard off-the-shelf tools? Do they use stuff that they've built themselves? And so as you start to work your way up, it starts becoming more and more and more difficult for your adversary to be able to re-engage. Why? Because they're humans. Almost always there's a human being on the other end of that thing, and human beings operate where we are most comfortable. We are creatures of habit. So that's why when you look at the research on like the APT groups and stuff like that, you'll go through and and some of them when they compromise businesses, they like to go through web servers. Some of them prefer RDP brute force. Some of them have gotten very good at phishing, right? So these individuals are operating where they are comfortable. They're operating where they're good. So if you really want to grind them to a halt, find out how they operate and then put countermeasures in place. Or if you really want to find them, understand what those behaviors are, understand how they operate, and then go out and go start looking for them. So the highest end, this TTP, so if you can get a search or several searches that target those specific behaviors used by those adversaries, then when everything comes back negative, or if you do happen to find a positive, actually get a hit, you're gonna have a higher level of confidence in, yeah, I actually think this is an issue, or no, this is a one-off, as compared to just doing like, hey, yeah, we searched all the hash values and at the end of the day we didn't find anything, we're good. Okay, well, hashes change all the time and so does their infrastructure, so I wouldn't expect their domain names or IP addresses to remain the same for very long either. So less about those kind of very easy ones. I'm not going to discount them. They have their uses. But when you're running a threat hunting program or you're trying to build those searches on your own, the closer you can get to actually looking for those individual behaviors, the better it's going to be for you guys.
So like, where do you start? So if you work in financial industry, do you look at the industry and what APTs target that industry and like go down the list?
Yeah, I mean,
How do you start from the top down?
so I'm going to get to it in one of the other sections where we kind of walk through it. But what happens is that you have to, there's always a question that needs to be answered, right? That's that hypothesis. Now, from there, there's the attack profile and kind of threat intelligence of, and you'll notice when I get to it, there's the first step is evaluation. Does this problem actually apply to us? Because certain groups don't operate inside of the United States, they don't operate inside of North America, or they don't target your business silo, right? There is no point in going through and looking for signs of an of a threat group if they only operate in India, unless you're in India. So what you end up doing is it's kind of a combination of the threat intelligence piece of it, like what are the actual threat actors, how do they operate, and then comparing that to your attack surface of, okay, does this actually affect us? And part of your attack surface is really like your business profile. What do you do? Where do you operate? How do you operate? You know, if a particular group has a fondness to exploit a specific vulnerability and that vulnerability doesn't exist in your organization, are you really going to pay that much attention to it? So there's that first evaluation step that I'm going to kind of get to here is kind of where everything comes together of, okay, is this actually something where we need to go through and dig deeper, where we actually have to go, hey, this is worth investigating. Does that make sense? Yeah, and I'll show you kind of what I mean, because like I said, we're going to go through over the ferocious kitten, and I'll kind of walk you through that. Where to find logs. Go ahead.
And what's a TTP?
Tools, techniques, and procedures, or tools, techniques, and TTP. Tactics. That was it. Yeah. So when you think about that, the TTPs are really just their behaviors. What do they do? How do they like to operate? Does one of them like to fat finger things? Do they have a particular penchant for like a naming convention? Like I said, stuff like that. Do they prefer to come in through a web shell? Do they prefer to go phishing? Do they, that kind of stuff. Where you're going to be looking, first thing, logs. And I highly encourage anybody that has not already done it, but make sure that you have PowerShell. PowerShell logging by default is turned on, but I don't think it's at the recommendation is I think you set it for one level higher where you actually get the full script itself when it runs, if I remember correctly. So when I first started this, PowerShell logging wasn't even a thing. And that was a fun fight to get everything done. And then a lot of your data is going to come from the endpoints. It's a lot of the stuff that I talked about, the registry, schedule tasks, right? We need another persistence mechanism, and a way to do that is through a scheduled task. Just simply the presence of a file. When ransomware kicks off, they always leave that stupid little note, right? So if you can go through and perform a search and figure out, yeah, that note's right there, okay, well, now we know that it ran. But this could also be like just the presence of malware. The tools, they stage tools on the systems where they go and jump off. So you can go through and you can find those areas where they bounced between the different boxes, and you'll find their tools staged there. Whoops. And endpoints. So I talked about kind of earlier in the first one, in the first section, like all of the different kind of little data points. And one of the reason I did that was to kind of get you away from the idea of it had to be something, like the hash value, that it could really be kind of like anything that you want anything that might be used in some level of identification, right? Like I talked about how sometimes a folder structure can actually do that. With endpoints, there's a lot of information, there are a lot of useful information on there, but what you don't often have within organizations is the ability to actually go check those things, right? So when organizations get into threat hunting, a lot of times they think, oh, we have to go buy this really expensive software or do all of this stuff. No, you actually don't really have to. There are a whole slew of free and open source threat hunting applications. Facebook made actually one of the best ones, and I wish I could remember the name of it. But it basically just works off of a query. And so on the kind of the master controller, you put in a query, and then it'll basically replicate itself out to all of the other systems, and then as it gets answers, it piles it back in. And there's a couple of other ones. One works through WMI, and another one works through PowerShell, and they work. But you can also do this through, like we did. One of the things when we were first starting was, if you have a configuration management application that will be able to go out and either look for a particular registry key or an object or something on the endpoint, or actually be able to pull that data back. So just a very, very simple one. We went out and we went into BigFix and we said, give us all of the keys or all of the values that are associated with current user run. Right, so H key local machine, current user 001, right, /run. That is one of the many locations where you can put a startup program, so when you boot the system, it's gonna try and run. And so we just said, give us all the values back for that one. And then we took that, put it in a spreadsheet, and actually we loaded it, we got a CSV, and then we loaded it into Splunk. And then let Splunk do do a little bit of churning on it, and we were able to actually go through and do threat hunting through there by just looking at all the entries. And you can use something called frequency of least occurrence. So the way that goes is something that happens in your environment on a regular basis, right? Like if you go search up endpoint logs for a specific endpoint, you're going to see certain entries 10,000 times, right? Well, we can figure that that's a valid behavior, okay? And then, but what about the ones down at the bottom that only have 1, 2, 5, or 6 entries, right? Those are not common events. Those are not things that are happening on the regular, so those raise a little bit more suspicion. So it allows you to go through and kind of cut off, okay, everything with 100 up, we don't care about. Anything under 100, we want to see it. And then it's just looking at the evidence that's been presented in front of you. So, but we use BigFix to be able to do that. And then you can use SCCM to push out PowerShell. You can do a GPO to be able to push out something like a PowerShell script to be able to kick data back. So it does not require these expensive threat hunting applications. It just requires that you know what you're looking for and you find a way to go out and look for the data. So, any questions? All right. So my one shameless plug for Trend Micro on this one is I have the antivirus up there. Our endpoint product will actually you can hand it a list of indicators of compromise, and it will go out and search all of the available endpoints or any of the endpoints that you tell it to go hit, and it will search for those different indicators of compromise. So if you're looking for, specific URLs, domain names, all that fun stuff. So don't look, check out and see if you have that functionality through your AV or any of your other products to just be able to kind of go out and interrogate the system, bring something back. Okay? So, threat hunting. When you actually go do this, the best analogy that I ever heard about this is it's like pulling a thread on a sweater. Okay? Sometimes you're going to pull that thread and it's going to be 2 inches and it's done, right? Everybody get the dangly, the thread coming out of the shirt, and sometimes you give it a tug and the whole thing unravels, okay? And then other times you give it a tug and it's like, oh, okay, great, That's how threat hunting in a very strange way works. Because you go out, you're doing these searches, you're looking for these things, and sometimes you find it, you pull that thread and you go, huh, nothing. And then other times you pull the thread and you go, oh, crap. So, just kind of be aware. And it also, threat hunting doesn't have to be as organized as kind of I make it sound, because a lot of times what it starts off as is just a question. You go to investigate an endpoint, you're standing up software on a server and you go, why is this service running? Why is this here? Why do I have an RDP connection? Why is there an active session? Why? Why is one of those questions that I always say it's the question that everybody should ask all the time. Why? My kids perpetually. Why? Oh God. But that's how you find things, is just being curious and kind of going, well, why is this here? And then doing a little bit of work on it and looking through it. So when I say it all starts with a question, I mean, it really does. It all starts with the question. When you are working in a threat intelligence, or if you're in a security team, you are going to have people that are going to come up to you and they're going to go, did you hear about this new exploit? Did you hear about, well, what about this new group? Did you hear about this new hacking tool? You're like, okay, yeah, I read up on it. Okay, I know what's going on. Now, in my experience with some of these, it was always a VP that was sending out an email that just happened to CC the CIO or somebody, and they would ask the question, well, I read an article about this new threat attack group, and I think that this is something that we really, okay. So here's your, but if you think about it, that's your question. Have we been attacked by this group? Okay, well, how do we go answer that? So the first stage is to actually evaluate that question. And the first thing is, does it actually apply to us? When I was answering him earlier, I said, there is no point in investigating a threat group if it doesn't operate inside of North America, right? Why am I going to go look for somebody that only operates in like Iran? I've taken a look at it, Mr. VP, and no, this isn't a problem because they don't actually affect us. They don't operate in our silo. They don't, If you can't get a good answer to say whether or not this is truly worth your time, you kind of move into the next step, which is to research it, AKA Google it. If you, and I am dead serious, Google is the greatest source of knowledge when it comes to this. It's your Google foo has to be pretty good, but all it really takes is just a couple of well-crafted searches, and I guarantee you can find whatever information it is that you're looking for. There are so many companies and so many private people out there doing threat research, publishing their findings, blogs, all of it. Podcasts, the whole thing. I guarantee you, if you are looking for something, almost 99% of the time, somebody has already written about it in some way, shape, or form. And that you can either, and it'll be there for you to use. So as you're going through and doing your research, what you're looking for are those IOCs, those indicators of compromise. What are the pieces of evidence that they're going to leave behind from those behaviors, from however they might choose to attack you. And then the other thing to keep in mind with this is that you also, in doing your research and figuring out how they're going to attack, you figure out where to focus your efforts, right? I'm not going to look through weblogs if a group prefers to make entry by launching phishing campaigns, right? No point. Because they're not going to attack my web server, they're going to try and phish me, okay? And then as you're going through, you go down, you determine, hey, yes, this is a question that we do in fact need to answer. We go through, we research it, we're looking for those individual pieces. What are those things that we can use out of all of this stuff that we might be able to find evidence of it in our environment? Okay, and then the next step is you go hunt. You actually go through, you use whatever data sources are at your disposal, and you go through and you try looking for those pieces of evidence to say, yeah, we might actually have a problem here. So, and then I threw this last slide in, nope, not this one. So yeah, Google foo must be strong. The attack.miter.org, if you haven't been, go. They have done a really good job of taking all malicious attackers do the same basic steps. They do them all very differently, but they all do or have all kind of the same basic steps. And what MITRE has done a really good job of is grouping all of the different attack techniques based upon those kind of unique behaviors. And inside of each attack technique, they have a lot of detail on who uses it, actually, I should just show you guys in a second anyways. The car.miter.org is actually a little bit more applicable. It is a project to actually take kind of the theoretical, well, what's the best way to put this? They take the stuff that you find in the the MITRE attack framework and actually kind of codify it into something that you can use to actually go out and do your threat hunts, where it'll actually go through and take this particular attack technique, whatever it may be, and then they'll actually say, well, if you want to find it, this is where you can look for evidence. This is the type of stuff that you might want to be looking for. So, and then the SANS reading room. SANS was very big when I kind of got a start in this, and they were one of the first ones to really jump into threat hunting. So they have a lot of really good white papers on not only just kind of overview basic threat hunting, but really how to go through and kind of stand up a program to make it active and make it work for you. So last slide, and then we're going to go after the ferocious kitten. So I've gone out, I've done my search, I've gotten all of my data back. Now what? It's not always as simple as going, okay, I got a positive hit, I got a problem. Maybe. Not all IOCs are created equal. Remember I talked earlier about the hash values and the domain names. Just because you don't get a hit on those doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have an issue. So there are some things, and if you think about, if you have if you say find, a fairly common attack tool on an endpoint, but you're not finding any other evidence anywhere else in your environment, can you really say that you were attacked by a specific group? No, you just know that I've got tools sitting on this endpoint, and I mean, don't get me wrong, this is something that you need to look into. But this is not, answering that question of have we been attacked? Have we been exploited by this particular vulnerability? Now, and then the more related IOCs that you get, the more confident you can be in answering your question. So a lot of times groups, they'll use particular attack types, they'll use particular ways to exfiltrate data. They will use, certain IP addresses, right? So if you go through and you search for all of those individual pieces, and then you start finding hits across all of those different methodologies, now you know, because of, anybody heard of, it's called compounding intelligence? So when you have a piece of intelligence and you're trying to validate it as being true, the more times that you hear it from individual unrelated sources, the more likelihood that that piece of data is true. And in this case, it's basically the same premise. The more pieces of data that you can find that point to that particular group, vulnerability, whatever it may be, the more confidence you're going to be able to have in your answer when going back and saying, yes, we do actually have a problem, or no, we don't. So, and now we're going to walk through the ferocious kitten. All right, so actually, I know what I need to do. Give me half a second. Displays. All right. You guys should see the MITRE webpage. All right. So, if I have now been asked, I just heard about this new group called Ferocious Kitten, and I now and I have been tasked with figuring out whether or not this is something, and tasked with hunting within our environment to see if this is a group, okay. So remember, the first step is you have to evaluate the question. Is this actually going to affect us? And then you go through and you figure out, okay, it is going to affect us. How do I actually find these guys? So in this case, if I look, When I said MITRE did a great job in bringing this up and making it easy for people, I really meant it. So in this case, I kid you not, this is a true attack group. Ferocious Kitten is a threat group that has primarily targeted Persian-speaking individuals in Iran since at least 2015. I'm running a business in the United States. Is this something that I need to worry about? No. No, I don't. So I would immediately go back to that person and go, no, it's not worth my time to be able to go through and search for this. Because they're only targeting Persian-speaking users. Okay? Now, for the sake of argument, just because I like the name more than what they actually, whether or not they affected us or not, we're going to go through and pretend that these guys actually operate in North America. So looking through the MITRE, this page right here, they give you a breakdown and a list of all of the different techniques that they use. Acquire infrastructure, masquerading, they use tools. Notice they like to work through the phishing, spear phishing attachments, and then they like to use malware, okay? And then here's some of the different pieces of software that they use. They've been known to use the Bits Admin and the Marquee Rat. So just from here, I have a couple of different things that I can go through and look up. So I can focus on the individual techniques that they use, and I can investigate that further by clicking right through here, user execution malicious file, and it's going to kind of tell me, give me some information about that. Or I can go through, and they always have these great blogs. And remember when I said that all you have to usually do is have good Google foo and you can find what you're looking for? So I went through and did a search for this, and there's about 3 or 4 articles out there with just one simple search, right? That broke down everything that this group did. So this was one of them, and this was just linked within the MITRE page, right? I didn't actually have to go and really do more work than a simple Google search and touching a couple of links, okay? But in this background, they talk about, here's the at least 2015, targeting Persian-speaking individuals. And then, here we go, they were 2020, 2021, and the document, notice here, this is what the document is called. Here we have a name. Now, if something like this showed up on a US, on an English speaker's computer, that might be something that you would queue off on, right? So, and then if you notice inside of here, romantic solidarity with love, well, lovers of freedom 2.doc, that's actually the name of it. But this is interesting, contains malicious macros, oh wait, hang on. Oh, so they talked about, this is it right here. They talked about the content of the message. And so this is a Word doc specifically, but if we're looking at it, at content of something, kind of what's one of the first things that comes to mind? When you're talking about attackers trying to get in, what's the number one way that they always try and breach or try and get you to, trying to hack you? It's phishing. Phishing. 94% of all attacks start through email. They start through phishing. So think about the content of the email. If you have the ability to search through the content of emails, you then, if like in this group, what they're doing is they're appealing to the people that want freedom, Persian-speaking people that want freedom, and about people that follow behind individuals that have been imprisoned. So something that's that specific would be fairly easy to find if you had the ability to go through, search through all of your emails. Like I said, it doesn't have to be this, blaring red light signal that you've been compromised. Just about anything can be used to kind of go through and do threat hunting in some way, shape, or form. And then here, so the document, let's see, can I zoom in here to make life easier on you guys? Nope. There it is. That's better. So here is the actual message content. But then notice that when they talked about it up here, it contains a malicious macro that are accompanied by an odd decoy message attempting to convince the victim to enable it. And you can see right here, macros have been enabled, and it's telling you to enable it across the top. Somewhere in here is a message saying, hey, look, click on the enable content macros. And what that does is it runs this macro right here. Now, notice I had, when I gave the example earlier about the malicious script that we were able to recover in the course of an incident. We were able to go and look through there for things that we might be able to search for again. In this case, you can see that we also have something that we can use in here. So what they do is this C drive users public update.exe. They drop that file, and then in here they tell you where they're going to move it to and what it's going to look like right here. This app data roaming, see it across the board right here. Start menu, programs, startup, sve host.exe. So if somebody was hit by this particular malicious macro, I have a file here that I can search for the presence of. And it really is in many ways just that simple. And then we go down a little bit further, and then this is the analysis of the RAT tool, the remote access Trojan that they use. And here, again, remember I talked about mutexes? So in this case, this is the name of that mutex object that's created by this rat that's running. So if you were to go through and perform a search for a mutex object and you put that in there and you got a hit back, that is a very high confidence indicator that you have at least been hit by somebody that is using that particular rat. Now, if you're going through and you have additional searches out and you're finding emails and you're finding like the macros, you're finding the files that we had in the locations that we identified them from that macro, right? There's that, I talked about the compounding intelligence. That's those things. Each of those is completely unique indicators. They're not related, but they're related in one way, that they come from this particular threat group. So, and then they have a couple more that they talk about in here. These are, well, this one creates a log file named NFO, right? Then you've got initiates communication with a command and control server. So if you have something like a web filter or a web proxy, right? You could go through and search through the web proxies or the web data to see if anything has gone out to try and go out to those command and control servers, that kind of stuff. These are additional commands that so if you notice right here, what this is that this is the malware. That rat leverages the bits admin application to be able to perform functions as part of when it sends commands, try and open shells and that kind of a thing. And what the highlighted piece here is that this is these are some of the commands that this rat will use. So you can actually go through and search if there's a way to be able to search if that bits admin has been used to maybe run some of those different commands. So keylogger, and then as we go down, it starts talking into more about the malware and what it does, and some of the different commands. And what you're seeing right here is these are actually the commands that they have identified through the reverse engineering as to what exactly the rat can do. Yeah, so that's really kind of the long and the short of that whole process, right? So we started with a question. Have we been attacked by the ferocious kitten? No, we haven't, because they operate in Persia or they operate in Iran. But for the sake of argument, we're going to say that they do. And just doing one simple readout We know that we can look for files existing in specific locations. We can look for mutex objects for the particular tools that they use. And we know some of the command and control servers, and we know how they like to be able to gain entry through phishing. So I've got 4, 5, 6 behaviors right there that I have pieces of evidence, IOCs, that I can go searching for. Now it's just really a matter of leveraging the technologies in my environment to be able to go out and see if those things exist. So I hope this has been useful. I hope that you guys are a little bit less terrified of the idea of threat hunting and understand that it's really not as difficult as it sounds. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of work to provide this information, and all you have to do is Google it and then just know what to do with it. And that is all going to depend upon how your environment is set up. You know, what tools you guys have at your disposal. So, any questions? Anything else?
Is that software a trial company or a trial version that you mentioned during your shameless plug?
My shameless plug?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we Apex?
Do we what? I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes. If you want a trial of Apex, we can get you one. We don't have, so if you wanted one of our products, we do, the Cloud One workload security. We have a free 30-day trial. The one that I was speaking specifically to, which is Apex, that one doesn't. If you ask, we will gladly get you guys a demo license, but we don't have it like the free 30-day that we have with like the Cloud One, with the workload security piece. The simple answer is yes, but not as easy as it is with the other one. So, okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time. I hope it was informative.